Hey guys, tonight we're going to whisper our way through dirt, war, famine, and potatoes. Picture this: fog rolls over an empty Prussian field in the 18th century, and somewhere, a horse exhales mist through cracked lips. In the distance, you hear the rhythmic squeak of a wooden cart pulled by a man who's seen too many winters and eaten too little bread. Everything feels brittle, uncertain, like one bad harvest away from collapse. And in the middle of this mess stands a king. Not just any king, Frederick the Great. A man whose powdered wig is probably the warmest thing on him during these icy dawns. He's brilliant, stubborn, and a little dramatic. And right now, his kingdom is starving. The soil isn't giving, the people are panicking, and the treasury is about as full as a modern adult social battery on Monday morning. Prussia, in the mid-1700s, isn't exactly the most vibrant place. There's war fatigue, a deeply unequal society, and a growing realization that if something doesn't change soon, the whole state might just collapse under the weight of its own boots and bureaucracy. You walk through a village, houses are slumped like tired shoulders, dogs bark more out of habit than hunger, and the fields look like they've given up trying to produce anything edible. Here's your reality check: you probably wouldn't survive this. Not because you're not strong or smart, but because you don't know how to make soup out of turnip leaves and prayers. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I'm always curious who's drifting off with me across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand near the royal palace at Potsdam, where Frederick scribbles on parchment like a man racing against time. His elegant handwriting is framing desperate plans, not for war, but for food. Grain crops keep failing. Inflation creeps up like ivy on a crumbling wall. Prussia, always sandwiched between bigger, hungrier empires, doesn't have room for a famine. You wouldn't know it yet, but right there on the edge of a desk, almost unnoticed, is a lumpy little thing, imported and overlooked, a potato. Yes, the potato, the future hero of tonight's tale. Brought from the Andes centuries earlier, this underground vegetable had been slowly meandering its way into Europe. The Spanish brought it back in the 1500s, but it never quite took off. Too foreign. Too ugly. Too dirt-flavored. In fact, most Europeans were suspicious of potatoes. Some thought they caused leprosy. Others called them devil apples. If Instagram existed, potatoes would have been cancelled before they even got a profile picture. But Frederick is no fool. He knows the potato's potential. It's hardy. It grows underground, safe from harsh weather. It produces more calories per acre than wheat. And it doesn't throw a tantrum every time the skies forget to rain for a week. The problem? His people hate it. They think it's food for pigs, not humans. You imagine trying to convince a proud Prussian farmer, calloused hands, missing teeth, that this weird tuber will save his family. Good luck with that. Still, Frederick decides he won't give up. If war didn't break him, picky peasants won't either. He writes edicts. He hosts events. He even orders that potatoes be planted in royal gardens. At first, it doesn't work. People ignore him. Some dig up the potatoes and throw them away. Others feed them to livestock and wait for the real crops to return. Meanwhile, the famine gets worse. In certain provinces, entire harvests fail. People eat acorns, tree bark, whatever's left in the corners of the cellar. You pass by a child clutching a bowl of warm water, pretending it's soup. Frederick knows he's running out of time. And options. So, he tries something bold. A bit sneaky. A bit brilliant. He surrounds his royal potato fields with armed guards, not to keep people out, but to attract them. Reverse psychology at its finest. The guards are under secret orders to look the other way at night. Sure enough, curious peasants sneak in and steal the potatoes. Soon, local farmers are growing them secretly in their own plots, whispering like they've just smuggled gold. That's when things start to change. Potatoes pop up in places they weren't before. Villages that were barely hanging on suddenly have a dependable food source. Sure, they still complain about the taste. One farmer says they chew like damp chalk, which, honestly, isn't entirely wrong. But they're filling. Reliable. And they survive where other crops give up. Historians still argue whether Frederick's plan was as effective as legends claim, or if peasants would have eventually accepted potatoes on their own. But what's clear is this: the tide begins to turn. Slowly. Quietly. Like steam rising from a pot of boiled spuds. One winter evening, you sit with a Prussian family, their small home lit by oil and hope. There's a stew bubbling. It smells earthy. Not delicious, but not desperate either. There are potatoes in it. Soft. Lumpy. Comforting. The father scoops a spoonful, then another. No one says it out loud, but you can feel it, the worst may be passing. And somewhere in his palace, Frederick hears of this. He smiles. Not the smug grin of a king who's won a war. But the weary satisfaction of a man who convinced an entire kingdom to bet their lives on something that grows underground. And for now, that's enough. So here you are, trudging through the thawing fields of Prussia, where the first green shoots of spring poke up from the dirt like shy guests arriving late to a party. The air still smells faintly of wood smoke and boiled roots, but something feels lighter. And everywhere you look, the potato is no longer an oddity, it's becoming a quiet revolution. You pass a row of small farms, and tucked among their wheat and barley plots are now patches of low, leafy plants, humble potato vines curling just above the earth. Not showy. Not glamorous. But they're there. Like resilient little foot soldiers holding the line against hunger. And who do we have to thank for this unlikely heroism? Our guy, Frederick the Great. King of Prussia, flautist, war tactician, and now, food influencer. Frederick doesn't stop with guarded fields. Oh no. He doubles down. He starts issuing more edicts. In one, he insists that all Prussian farmers must cultivate potatoes alongside traditional grains. In another, he threatens fines for those who refuse. It's kind of like a kingly version of peer pressure, but with added paperwork. And the resistance is real. You walk through a village meeting, and old men mutter about tradition. One spits on the ground when someone mentions the word Kartoffel. You watch a mother hide her children's potato stew behind the door when her father visits. It's not just about food, it's pride, identity, and fear of change all rolled into one starch-laden lump. Still, the logic is undeniable. Potatoes aren't just hardy, they're democratic. They grow in poor soil, they store well for winter, and they don't need a nobleman's blessing to survive. A peasant family with a small plot can feed themselves with a few sacks of spuds, even if everything else fails. Frederick, ever the strategist, seizes this angle. He sends emissaries to remote regions, not just with seeds, but with instructions on how to plant, harvest, and cook the potato. In some areas, royal cooks give public demonstrations on making potato soup, roasted potatoes, even potato bread. It's the 18th century version of a state-sponsored TikTok recipe tutorial. Of course, not everything goes smoothly. In Silesia, farmers try to fry raw potato slices in pig fat, only to discover that undercooked potatoes are, well, terrible. Elsewhere, rumors spread again about leprosy, and some clergymen argue that the Bible never mentions potatoes, so they must be unnatural. One even claims the devil planted them during the flood to test man's stomach and soul. But against all odds, potatoes keep growing. Historians still debate whether the crop spread because of Frederick's charm or despite it. Some say the real push came from hungry soldiers returning from war, who'd eaten potatoes in the field and knew their worth. Others argue that once a few communities embraced them and survived the next winter, neighboring villages simply followed out of envy or desperation. You sit in on one of those village dinners. The fire crackles, children sleep with full bellies, and the elders, despite their initial scorn, chew quietly on potato dumplings. One mutters, "It's not bad, for peasant food." Another chuckles and goes for seconds. The shift isn't instant, but it's steady. Potatoes begin to infiltrate cultural identity. They show up at weddings, festivals, even funerals. The nobility still looks down on them. After all, there's no silver-plated way to serve a boiled tuber. But among commoners, they become a symbol of quiet endurance. And then comes the real test, a drought. The summer of 1771 is cruel. Rivers shrink to trickles, wheat fields curl up like old paper, and grain prices soar. In many European states, famine looms again. Bread riots erupt in France. Austrian peasants steal from caravans. But in Prussia? Things are tense, but not catastrophic. Why? You guessed it, potatoes. Because they grow underground, the heat doesn't wreck them the way it does wheat or barley. They require less water. They hold up longer in storage. By the end of that cruel summer, Prussian peasants still have something to eat, even if it's just boiled potatoes and salt. It's not glamorous, but it's survival. And in 18th century Europe, that's saying something. Frederick takes a quiet victory lap. He doesn't gloat, but he lets the numbers speak. Mortality rates in Prussia drop, even as neighboring regions suffer. The state doesn't fall into bankruptcy. And more importantly, the people begin to trust their weird little underground vegetable. By the late 1770s, Prussia is producing more potatoes than ever. Surpluses allow some communities to trade or sell them. A few enterprising families even invent new recipes: potato pancakes, thick stews, potato beet salad. The dishes vary by region, but they all share one thing: they keep bellies warm through harsh winters. You wander into a roadside tavern where a traveling merchant sips beer and eats something mushy and golden. He laughs. 5 years ago, I wouldn't touch this. Now? I ask for seconds. He offers you a bite, and it tastes like history changing, slowly, quietly, one mouthful at a time. And somewhere in Potsdam, Frederick writes another letter. This time not about war or policy, but about legacy. He doesn't ask to be remembered as a conqueror. He says, simply, if I have done any good for my people, may it be this. A humble wish. For a humble vegetable. As you make your way into the quieter corners of Prussia's countryside, something starts to settle in your bones, a sense of peace, maybe, or just the pleasant warmth of a full belly. The villages feel more relaxed now, and the children look healthier, less hollow around the eyes. There's a rhythm again to life: sow, harvest, cook, repeat. The potato has rooted itself not just in the soil, but in daily life. Now, remember those royal guards who once pretended to protect potato fields? Well, the theater is over. No more staged guards or artificial scarcity. Potatoes are everywhere, and no one needs convincing anymore. In fact, in a delightful twist of irony, some towns start holding potato festivals. Yes, that's right, you attend one. There are humble decorations made of potato blossoms, laughter over mugs of ale, and even a competition for the largest spud grown that season. The winning tuber is roughly the size of a baby goat. Its owner is a local hero for a month. Frederick, who once forced the crop upon a skeptical nation, now watches it become a badge of honor. He must have smiled at that. But Prussia isn't the only place feeling the potato effect. The story begins to ripple outwards. Neighboring states, especially those always sniffing around for the next advantage, take notice. Saxony, Bavaria, parts of Poland, they send envoys, not to discuss trade or war, but to ask about planting techniques. They request soil samples. They ask Prussian farmers to speak at regional councils. You find yourself listening to a weathered man from Königsberg lecturing nobles on when to rotate potato beds. Historians still argue whether Frederick intended to create this agricultural diplomacy, or whether it was just a happy accident. Some claim he saw food security as a long-term power move. Others think he just wanted fewer angry peasants knocking on the palace door every winter. Either way, the outcome is the same. Potatoes become one of Prussia's most effective exports, not just as a crop, but as an idea. Meanwhile, in places less lucky, food shortages continue. You read a letter from a French merchant who marvels at the health of Prussian peasants compared to their neighbors. They have this tuber, he writes, this root of the soil that laughs at drought and cold. The merchant tries to buy a barrel of potatoes but is told he'd have better luck growing his own. He does. Back at home, the economics begin to shift. With fewer people dying from hunger, there are more working hands. Children survive into adulthood. Elderly parents aren't a financial burden, they're respected. Families who once scraped together pennies for bread can now save. A small surplus here. A wedding gift there. Some even afford shoes for all their children at once. Wild, I know. And then come the entrepreneurs. A clever Prussian baker starts drying thin slices of potato and selling them as travel rations. They're cheap, light, and, shockingly, delicious. Soldiers love them. So do merchants. They don't know it yet, but you're watching the faint, distant ancestor of the modern potato chip being born in a smoky village oven. You sit by a fire with an old soldier who remembers the early days. He scratches his beard and says, "We used to think the king was mad, forcing us to eat dirt food. But now, I grow them myself. Better than grain. More honest." He passes you a steaming potato from the coals, wrapped in cloth. You bite in. The skin is charred and split, the inside soft and buttery, needing nothing more than a pinch of salt. What was once laughed at is now comfort food. Even the nobility can't ignore the change. Though they don't farm potatoes themselves, heavens, no, they start investing in them. Some lease land specifically for tuber cultivation. Others sponsor experimental hybrid varieties, hoping for faster growth or richer flavors. A few forward-thinking aristocrats even serve potatoes at formal dinners, but only in elaborate French styles, of course, like purees with thyme or thin golden rosettes. And still, the scholars remain suspicious. You find a university pamphlet titled "The Risks of Excessive Tubers, a Philosophical Consideration." It argues that relying on one crop could lead to moral decay, or perhaps tooth loss. Another scholar counters, writing that the potato gives energy without agitation and may reduce quarrels among students. There's no consensus, of course. Academics rarely agree, especially when potatoes are involved. Meanwhile, the church softens its stance. In fact, one preacher you listen to actually uses the potato as a metaphor for divine mercy. It grows hidden beneath the earth, unseen yet nourishing, he says, voice echoing through the rafters. Is that not the hand of God? Congregants nod. A few wipe tears from their eyes. It's a strangely moving sermon, for a root vegetable. Your journey takes you deeper into the mountains, where once forgotten villages now bustle with life. In one town, people light lanterns shaped like potatoes every autumn, a thank you to the crop that saved their grandparents. Children run through the streets with sack races, guess what's in the sacks? Adults gather to share their harvest recipes. One old woman boasts that her potato schnitzel can mend a broken heart. You believe her. And just when it seems like the potato can't get any more beloved, Frederick issues one final proclamation. He designates a day of thanks, not just for the harvest, but specifically for the potato. No work, only feasting. And he asks the people to remember what it was like before, when stomachs were empty and winters were cruel. You wake to the rustle of wind through golden leaves, the scent of damp earth and something sizzling on a campfire, a thin potato pancake crisping in a pan blackened from years of use. The village you've been traveling with is on the move again, following seasonal rhythms, their carts stacked with root vegetables and salted fish. But now, potatoes dominate the pile. It's no longer just a food, it's a currency of well-being, a buffer against chaos. As more regions adopt the humble spud, local economies begin to transform. You walk into a small Prussian town square where, once, bartering for bread and wool was the norm. Now, there's a vendor selling potato pies next to a man who offers horse rides in exchange for a sack of fingerlings. Potatoes don't just feed, they trade, they buy, they enable. And this isn't just happening in villages. Cities, too, feel the pulse of the potato. In Berlin, you pass bakeries advertising potato loaf and vendors selling potato beer. Yes, that's real. It smells starchy. You take a sip. It tastes like someone tried to ferment mashed potatoes with regret, but people drink it anyway. Why? Because it's cheaper than wheat beer, and, more importantly, it gets the job done. Factories start to emerge, small ones at first, almost quaint. You peek into one and see a contraption that washes, peels, and slices potatoes for long-term storage. A man nearby mutters something about industrializing the tuber. You chuckle. The machine groans like it hates its job but keeps working anyway. Welcome to the early days of food processing. One remarkable change you notice is the improvement in labor stability. With more food security, workers are more reliable. They're not calling off work because their children are sick from malnutrition. People are sturdier now. Less anxious. There's a quiet confidence that settles into the towns. Historians still argue whether this shift in productivity truly stemmed from the potato, or if it was a broader trend linked to Enlightenment values and improved hygiene. But the evidence is hard to ignore. Wherever the potato is planted, things seem to work just a little better. You walk past a school where a teacher explains crop rotation to a group of muddy children using a potato as a prop. You don't want to grow potatoes in the same place every year, she says, balancing the vegetable on her chalkboard ledge. Give the soil time to breathe. A little boy raises his hand. Can we eat the example later? The class bursts into laughter. Cultural pride blooms alongside these agricultural gains. Some communities begin to weave potatoes into their folklore. You hear a bedtime story about a magical potato that can never rot, said to appear only to those who farm with kindness. There's even a village where couples plant their first potato patch together before marriage. Some sort of earthy prenup. Of course, not all shifts are warm and folksy. With potatoes becoming a staple, markets start manipulating supply. You overhear two merchants arguing over storage practices. One wants to flood the market, the other hoard and drive prices up. It's just a potato, one groans. The other smiles. It's never just a potato anymore. You ride in a cart with a tax collector who explains that even local levies are changing. In areas where grain once paid the dues, potatoes are now considered fair tithe. He chuckles and says, the priests complain the altars smell of stew. You ask if that's better or worse than incense. He grins. Depends if you skipped lunch. Churches begin to host community stews after Sunday services. You sit at one, the kind where everyone contributes an ingredient, and the final dish is a muddy, fragrant blend of unity. One elderly man ladles the thick soup into your bowl and tells you, we stopped fighting over food. That's something. Even art begins to reflect the change. You visit a gallery displaying modest charcoal drawings. One shows a family around a table, each holding a single, steaming potato in their hands, their faces calm. Another depicts a field at dusk, glowing under a pale sky, the potato plants like sleeping giants. They aren't masterpieces, but they make your chest ache. In marketplaces, you see young girls selling flower crowns woven with potato blossoms, soft lilac and white petals that once marked crops for protection now signify innocence, harvest, and hope. You buy one and wear it for a while. You look ridiculous, but strangely at peace. And then comes something you didn't expect, poetry. Prussian poets, some respected, most not, begin publishing verses about the humble tuber. You find a volume titled Ode to Earth's Apple. It includes lines like, "O quiet root, thy skin so rough, thy yield so sweet, enough's enough." Not exactly Shakespeare, but heartfelt. You attend a recital. The poet wears an outfit suspiciously reminiscent of a burlap sack. He raises his hand dramatically and proclaims, "Where once famine fell, now roots rise." The small crowd applauds politely. One woman whispers, "It's better than last week's cabbage sonnet." Meanwhile, foreign observers continue to pour in. From Britain, France, even parts of Russia, agronomists visit to study the miracle of Prussian potatoes. You watch one man sketch a field while muttering to himself, "We must take this back." This is robust simplicity. Back home, families are buying more livestock. Why? Because potatoes let them feed animals through the winter. Pigs love them. Chickens tolerate them. Cows? Still skeptical. But the point is, it's not just humans who benefit. Farm economies grow richer, more diverse. And then there's the military. Ah yes, always the military. With a stronger, healthier population, conscripts are hardier. Training goes smoother. There are fewer deaths from malnutrition during marches. An officer you meet, grizzled and missing 2 teeth, says, "We fight better on potatoes than we ever did on bread." He claps you on the back so hard you almost drop your stew. Potatoes, it seems, are shaping not just stomachs, but institutions. You wake with the sound of distant wheels grinding over cobblestone and the low bray of a mule. You're on the edge of Königsberg now, one of Prussia's great cities, where potato stalls stretch along the waterfront like a slow-moving river of starch and ambition. The city is bustling, but not with chaos. It's a kind of calm buzz, like a beehive that's mastered routine. Here, you see the next evolution of the potato revolution, its unexpected role in diplomacy and soft power. You pass a merchant explaining to a visiting Dutch trader that Prussian potatoes are hardier, earthier, and more agreeable to digestion. You're pretty sure he made that last part up, but the Dutchman buys a barrel anyway. You turn into a quiet courtyard, where an ambassador from Sweden sits nibbling on what looks like a crispy potato flatbread. He's nodding in agreement with a Prussian official. "A stable diet means a stable people," he says, brushing crumbs from his coat. And it's true. Other nations are beginning to take notice. What once seemed peasant fare is now being rebranded as pragmatic genius. At the royal court, King Frederick is enjoying a mild renaissance in popularity. Not because of a military campaign or a grand marriage alliance, but because of potatoes. A jester at court even begins incorporating potato humor into his routine. "Why did the Prussian soldier carry a potato into battle?" he cackles. "To plant fear." The crowd groans. You do too, but you're also a little impressed. The potato fields themselves have become something of a national icon. You overhear travelers comparing them to vineyards in France or rice paddies in Asia. There's a certain romance now, a nostalgia for an age still unfolding. You walk into a tavern where the ceilings are low and the air smells of sweat and roasted root vegetables. Above the hearth hangs a painting of Frederick the Great. Not on a horse, not holding a scepter, but kneeling in a field, inspecting potato plants with a look of calm intensity. The caption underneath reads, "The King's Gift." You order a potato dumpling stew. It arrives thick, buttery, and so hot it could strip paint. You blow on it, then smile. Over time, potato diplomacy extends even further. Prussia begins to export not just potatoes, but knowledge, pamphlets explaining planting techniques, irrigation methods, even advice on pest control. You visit a printing house churning out leaflets titled "Potato for the Patriot." Inside, a boy no older than 10 is setting type with the precision of a jeweler. He grins and says, "My father says potatoes made me clever." You nod. It's not a bad theory. Historians still argue whether these pamphlets were genuine outreach or subtle propaganda. Did Frederick care about helping neighbors, or just making Prussia look better? No one agrees. But the ink is real, the paper is passed hand to hand, and the ideas take root. In schools, potatoes become part of the curriculum. Not just in agriculture, but in art, economics, and even theology. One pastor explains that the potato is God's answer to man's craving for security beneath the soil. You're not sure how sound that is doctrinally, but the kids in the pews nod solemnly. Meanwhile, alliances begin to shift, not with dramatic treaties or royal marriages, but with agricultural exchanges. Prussia sends potatoes to Saxony, Saxony sends onion bulbs in return. You hear an advisor whisper, "This is the tastiest diplomacy we've ever tried." He's not wrong. One of the more curious developments is the potato festival held annually in the region of Silesia. You attend one by accident. It starts with a parade, wooden floats carved to resemble potatoes of increasing size. There's a judging contest for the largest tuber, and the winner, a woman with arms like tree trunks, hoists her knobby champion into the air like it's a newborn baby. The crowd cheers. You cheer too. You don't know why. At dusk, a play begins, half serious, half farce, about a fictional knight who rides across Prussia on a giant potato, saving villagers from famine. The special effects are terrible. The acting is worse. But the audience is delighted. You find yourself clapping at the end, swept up in the warmth of it all. In one quiet moment, you sit by a lake outside the city, watching as the last sunlight flickers over the water. A family nearby peels potatoes in rhythm, the swish of blade against skin a gentle song. The father hums a lullaby. The daughter giggles when she drops a slice into the water. You exhale. For a second, everything feels enough. And then, as night settles, you find yourself in the company of a local historian, an old man with soft eyes and ink-stained fingers. He tells you something that sticks with you. The potato didn't just feed us, he says, it taught us how to be patient. How to care for something we bury, and trust it will rise. You let that settle in your chest. Because that's the quiet magic of this era, not revolution in the streets, but in the soil. Not loud declarations of progress, but humble roots stretching downward, anchoring a nation that was, until recently, just one bad harvest away from despair. The world is watching. And Prussia, awkward, resilient, oddly poetic Prussia, is being seen not as the land of cold marches and endless wars, but as the home of a soft, quiet miracle. You're back in the countryside now, under a pale blue sky streaked with woolly clouds, the kind that make you squint and wonder if they're moving or just watching. You've followed the potato trail out of the city and into the rhythm of rural life, where time stretches, bends, and softens around the edges. You're in a village that doesn't appear on most maps, because what would cartographers know about the places where change grows? Here, the fields roll gently toward the horizon like sleepy hills wrapped in corduroy. The potato rows are staggered, methodical, patient. A boy runs past you, barefoot, laughing, trailing a wooden toy on a string that's shaped like, what else, a potato. You smile. You didn't think the tuber would become a national mascot, but here we are. It's harvest season, and everyone's involved. Old men with joints that creak like oak trees, children with dirt under their fingernails, and women balancing wicker baskets on hips like clockwork. All digging, lifting, laughing. The air smells of damp soil and dry straw, with an undertone of something starchy and warm, like boiled comfort. You crouch beside a farmer who tells you he can tell a potato's health just by the sound it makes when it thumps into the basket. You knock one yourself. It sounds like a wooden drum. He nods approvingly. This isn't just farming. It's something closer to ritual. A kind of faith in the mundane. One farmer tells you, I used to pray for rain. Now I pray my potatoes won't be too big, no one wants a misshapen prize. You chuckle. There's a strange elegance in this anxiety. You help carry a crate to a storage barn, cool and shaded, its walls lined with shelves. Inside, the air is heavy with the earthy sweetness of hundreds of harvested potatoes. Each shelf is labeled, by size, by firmness, even by flavor. One corner is dedicated to a special variety that locals swear tastes faintly of chestnuts. Only grows on this hill, says the owner, tapping his temple. Like our ideas. Local. Curious. Quietly valuable. Historians still argue whether Prussia truly became self-sufficient thanks to these humble crops, or whether it was simply better at managing public perception. After all, if a king can turn potatoes into patriotism, who's to say what's marketing and what's miracle? In a nearby cottage, you share a meal with a family of 6. The centerpiece is a simple dish, mashed potatoes, whipped with goat's milk and studded with pickled herbs. They call it victory porridge. The father toasts the table. To the root that raised us. His youngest child, maybe 5, lifts her mug of water like it's champagne. You clink cups. The conversation turns to marriage, as it always seems to in villages like this. The eldest daughter, barely 17, says a local boy proposed, by delivering a basket of his best potatoes with a ribbon and a poem. He called them love lumps, she giggles. You wince, but everyone laughs. Love, it seems, now comes with seasoning. You wander outside after dinner, where twilight is sinking into the landscape like ink on linen. A few villagers gather near a bonfire, telling stories that blur the line between myth and memory. One man swears his grandfather once grew a potato so large they used it as a stool at his wedding. Another tells of a nobleman who lost his entire estate gambling, except for his potato patch, which later earned him enough to buy it all back. And then there's the traveling bard, a wiry woman with a voice like rustling paper. She sings a lullaby you've never heard, soft and low. Beneath the soil where no eyes see. The quiet root feeds you and me. No crown, no sword, no palace gate. Just warmth enough to change our fate. You feel it settle in your bones. The kind of song that doesn't end so much as dissolve into your breathing. The Prussian countryside, once a patchwork of unpredictability and hunger, now breathes in seasons. There's a new rhythm. Children grow knowing that something soft and reliable lies beneath their feet. Mothers cook without rationing every crumb. Fathers stop measuring the winter by its cruelty, and more by how early the potatoes sprout. And all of this soft, starchy tapestry of rebirth, happened because someone once thought, maybe this ugly, lumpy thing from the New World could mean something here. You hear it said over and over, we plant potatoes, but they grow gratitude. A bit cheesy, sure. But there's truth in it. Back in the village, you see a makeshift shrine, a little wooden shelf nailed to a tree, holding a single golden potato under a candle. A child kneels beside it, murmuring thanks. You don't ask why. You just watch the flame flicker. Because in this moment, the economic theory, the royal decrees, the scientific farming manuals, they all shrink down to this: a warm meal, a quiet night, a full belly, and a tiny hope glowing on a tree in the middle of nowhere. The glow of that tiny potato shrine lingers behind your eyelids as you make your way down a gravel path lit by fireflies. You follow the winding road into the quieter corners of Prussia, the ones that don't get mentioned in textbooks or wartime speeches. Here, potato fields stretch out like patchwork quilts beneath the moonlight. There's a serenity in their neat rows, like they've aligned the chaos of the past into something digestible. Literally. You find yourself in a town that's not poor, but not rich either, just balanced. A schoolhouse stands near the center, its single bell already silent for the night. Inside, tucked behind dusty window panes, are slates and chalk drawings. One shows a crudely sketched potato wearing a crown. King Kartoffel, the teacher had joked. You imagine the children giggling, not realizing how close they are to the truth. Because the potato, in this quiet educational revolution, has become a subject all its own. At breakfast the next morning, you sit in on a classroom lesson. The children recite facts with sleepy enthusiasm, nutrient density, storage life, how it saved France during famines too. But the teacher goes beyond nutrition. She says, the potato teaches us resilience. It hides underground, survives cold, asks little, and gives much. A few of the kids roll their eyes. But one boy, head resting on folded arms, mouths the words along with her. Economic policy rarely makes it into bedtime tales, but this might. Because when a humble vegetable becomes a national symbol, you realize economics isn't only about markets and currency. Sometimes it's about how people feel when they go to bed full. Still, not everyone had been thrilled. You hear stories, whispers, of aristocrats scoffing at the potato's rise. Some saw it as vulgar, peasant food. Let them eat wheat, they'd said, before realizing wheat couldn't grow in half the terrain the tuber now dominated. Historians still debate whether Frederick the Great truly believed in the potato's power or simply saw a political opportunity. Was it compassion or calculation? A bid for loyalty? Or just a bet that stuck? You stop by a small local tavern, the Tubered Boar, as it happens, and overhear a group of tradesmen discussing how their fortunes turned once they diversified into potato byproducts. One sells potato starch for linen ironing. Another brews a clear spirit so strong it could sterilize wounds. They toast with shots of it. You politely decline. A merchant sitting nearby shares a rumor about a secret society, the Golden Root Circle, wealthy landowners who quietly cornered the potato market and influenced transport routes. They say they meet under a giant wooden potato sculpture in Brandenburg, he whispers, eyes wide with mock horror. You raise an eyebrow. Like a starch-themed Freemasonry? He nods, deadly serious. But then smiles. It's hard to say what's myth and what's memory out here. Further along your journey, you meet a woman named Gerland, who claims to be the first to crossbreed a frost-resistant variety. Named it after my mother-in-law, she says. She survived 7 winters with nothing but sass and sour cream. You try to respond, but you're too busy laughing. In her cellar, baskets line the walls like trophies. Each is tagged, Red Nibbler, Crown Bell, the other one. She hands you a slice of something golden, raw, sprinkled with salt. It tastes, oddly nutty. That's the one I bred during the rainy summer of '89, she says. Thought I'd go mad without sun, but the roots? The roots were calm. You pause to consider that, how potatoes grow in darkness, ask for no applause, and give generously. It's humbling. Maybe too humbling for some. Not every region had embraced the spud as holy. In more wheat-proud areas, there had been resistance. Whole protests had sprung up, no to tuber tyranny, banners and all. One pastor even declared potatoes ungodly, citing their underground growth as symbolic of sin hiding beneath the surface. That argument didn't hold up well when the bishop admitted to enjoying them mashed with butter. Back on the road, you visit a small shrine, not unlike the one by the tree, erected in honor of a farmer named Klaus. Legend says Klaus once fed an entire village with a single bumper harvest, refusing to sell any of it for profit. They needed it more, he reportedly said. A statue of him now holds a sack labeled Faith and Fiber. You're not sure if that's metaphorical or dietary advice. Children leave peeled potatoes at his feet as offerings. You begin to notice these subtle signs of gratitude embedded in rural life. Potato motifs carved into lintels. Folk songs sung with soft rhymes about the humble gold that never rusts. Even lullabies referencing the potato moon, when the harvest aligns with a full moon and it's said the tubers sleep sweeter in the soil. One evening, sitting beside a campfire, a gray-haired man tells you that his grandfather cried the first time he harvested a full crop. Not because of joy, he says. Because it was the first time he didn't have to choose which of his children got the last bread crust. The fire crackles. No one says anything for a while. And you realize, this isn't just a story about a vegetable. It's a story about dignity. The kind of dignity that returns when food is not a gamble. When survival is no longer a daily negotiation. When a field of rough-skinned roots means your family will sleep without the sound of stomachs growling. You lie down in a borrowed barn loft that night, wrapped in a wool blanket that smells faintly of hay and something buttery. You watch the stars blink above wooden beams, and you think, the potato didn't just save lives. It restored something less tangible, trust, maybe. In nature. In planning. In tomorrow. A rooster crows lazily somewhere in the distance as you stir awake beneath the barn rafters. Morning light filters in through the cracks in the wooden slats, golden and soft, like melted butter. You blink slowly, still feeling the warmth of last night's stories tucked around your shoulders like an extra quilt. As you stretch, the scent of breakfast reaches your nose, potatoes, obviously. Fried in lard with a pinch of salt and a generous heap of chopped onion. A staple. You wander down to the kitchen, where your host, a woman named Marta with cheeks like dumplings, hands you a steaming plate and says, "You'll need strength today." You're heading to the markets. The Prussian markets, as you're about to discover, were more than places of commerce. They were stages where economics danced its slow, potato-fueled ballet. And oh, what a performance. You arrive mid-morning in a town square humming with life. Stalls line the cobbled streets, each covered in bright linens. Crates overflow with produce, ribbons flutter in the wind, and the air hums with the rhythms of barter. But one thing dominates, potatoes in every form. Roasted, pickled, mashed, grated, even sweetened into something vaguely dessert-like and rather confusing to your modern palate. You notice a stall with a sign painted in faded blue, Friedrich's Fortune, EST 1760. Behind the table stands a wiry man in his 50s who proudly declares that his family was among the first to sell royal potatoes, after the king's decree. Our ancestors guarded those fields like sacred land, he says. My great-grandfather used to say, where there is tuber, there is treasure. Nearby, a woman demonstrates a potato-powered contraption, a small clock ticking reliably thanks to zinc and copper electrodes planted into two halved spuds. Children watch with wide eyes as time marches on, powered by lunch. Potatoes made us inventive, says the tinkerer. When grain failed, we didn't just survive. We adapted. And that was true across Prussia. Economic records from the time show an uptick in local innovation following the potatoes boom. From food carts to distilleries, from fertilizer experiments to crop rotation methods, people built small fortunes on the back of this route. But not all fortunes were earned. You pass by a quiet corner where a man in faded uniform leans against a wall, muttering to himself about counterfeit tubers. Apparently, during particularly desperate winters, dishonest merchants sold rocks coated in potato mash to fool hungry buyers. Grew none. Sold many, he cackles. You keep walking. Historians still argue whether such tales are apocryphal, or whether there really were cases of full-blown tuber fraud in rural towns. But one thing is certain, where there's demand, deception often follows. As the day wears on, the market transforms from a center of trade to a theater of memory. Elderly farmers gather near a fountain, comparing yields from seasons long past. They reminisce about frost, drought, blight, and the few perfect years when the earth gave generously. You sit beside them on a stone bench, nursing a small potato dumpling filled with spiced pork and pickled radish. One man, whose hat is nearly as large as his face, tells you about the infamous potato panic of '72. Too many crops, not enough mouths, he says. Prices dropped like spoiled cream. He chuckles. Never thought we'd cry over too many potatoes. That's the thing with economic miracles, they're always balanced on a knife's edge. One season too good, and the system wobbles. One season too bad, and people starve. But the potato helped stabilize things. Not solve everything, no, but it softened the sharpest edges of collapse. And it wasn't just economics. Social mobility crept in on quiet feet, disguised as potato sacks. Poor farmers with productive fields gained local clout. Some built barns, others built schools. A few even sent their children to universities, something previously unthinkable. You meet one such grandson of a potato baron turned scholar. He wears spectacles that seem permanently fogged and carries a small leather notebook in which he sketches potatoes, seemingly for fun. They calm me, he explains. All that quiet symmetry. Like the universe agreeing with itself. He shows you a page filled with tiny, labeled drawings, waxy, mealy, royal-eye, Königsblum. It's oddly beautiful. You feel like you're looking at botanical poetry. And then there's the man with the potato cart. You almost miss him, just a quiet old vendor at the edge of the market, selling nothing but boiled potatoes in paper cones. No toppings, no sauces. Just steam rising gently from each cone like incense from a censer. People line up anyway. When your turn comes, he looks at you, nods once, and hands you a cone. No words. Just a firm nod. You take a bite. The salt is just right. The potato, warm, buttery, soft, tastes like memory. You sit on a bench and let the crowd drift around you. Birds flutter above the clock tower. A child drops his cone, cries, then is handed another by a kind stranger. Two merchants argue gently over stall placement. A man plays a wooden flute near the well, and his dog howls along. It's not dramatic. It's not revolutionary. But it's a vision of peace, bought, at least in part, by a humble tuber and a king who saw farther than most. You think again of those market signs, the painted slogans, tuber is truth. Bread of the brave. Grow low, rise high. They're not just slogans. They're economic folklore. Reminders that even in times of despair, a small, round root helped an entire region rediscover stability, community, and hope. As you toss the last bite of your boiled cone into your mouth, the bells chime noon. You stretch your legs, dust off your coat, and walk slowly toward the outskirts of town, past more potato fields, always more, and into the gentle arms of Prussia's quiet countryside once again. You leave the market behind, but its quiet chorus follows you. Wooden carts creak, distant laughter rises like the scent of warm butter, and somewhere a fiddler plays a tune that sticks to your thoughts like mashed potatoes to a spoon. You trudge a narrow country road now, fields on either side, a patchwork of greens and golds, each square pulsing with quiet, cultivated life. The breeze carries a cool whisper from the nearby Elbe River, tugging at your sleeves and suggesting you turn off the path. Naturally, you obey. Following the sound of lapping water, you soon stumble upon an odd sight, a man in a crisp blue uniform standing beside a sign nailed to a tree. The sign reads, State Potato Field, Do Not Harvest. You blink. The man smiles and waves you over. Experimental plots, he says. We test yields, soil types, water levels, trying to optimize Prussia's finest starch asset. He walks you through a tidy row, pointing out subtle differences between two almost identical plants. This one? High starch. That one? Better for frying. You nod, deeply impressed, and also a little amused. Who knew potatoes had so many personalities? Turns out, the Prussian government wasn't done with its strategic love affair. After Frederick the Great's bold potato campaign, a second wave of state involvement arrived quietly but significantly. Agricultural academies began popping up, especially in eastern territories, where farmers were invited, strongly encouraged, to adopt new planting techniques and seasonal cycles. You're escorted to one such academy, a whitewashed stone building with tall windows and a vegetable garden in full bloom. Inside, a class is underway. An elderly professor with chalk-covered fingers draws a diagram on the board labeled Tuber Taxation Theory. The topic today, how potatoes reduced bread riots. It's not a joke. A drop in bread prices, thanks to reduced demand and potato substitution, significantly cooled tensions in urban centers. This had a calming effect on the labor class. The potato, in its quiet way, kept revolutions at bay. Historians still argue, the professor says in a gentle drone, whether Frederick's aim was nutritional, economic, or merely military. But the result is undeniable. Peace was grown, not brokered. The students scribble. You watch from the back, thinking about how this all started, with royal trickery, graveyard plantings, and rumors. And here you are, in a full-fledged potato think tank. Later, you take a stroll through the attached library, a dusty room filled with parchment records. One scroll, tied with a bit of string, catches your eye. It's titled, Observations from the Village of Klingenberg, 1791. You unroll it slowly. A man named Otto describes a bumper crop and its impact on his entire village. Children grew fat and happy, he writes. Mothers baked with less worry. Even our local thief took to farming, claiming the earth was more generous than sin. Fringe detail? Sure. But delightful nonetheless. You continue your journey across the countryside, now hopping rides with merchants and occasionally sleeping in barns when the wind turns cold. Every village you pass tells a slightly different potato story. In one, a woman shows you how she dyes fabric using potato skins soaked in vinegar. In another, a group of boys use dried-out potatoes as wheels for tiny toy wagons. One old man insists his great-uncle claimed to see a potato-shaped cloud just before proposing to his wife. It was a sign, he says solemnly, that our union would be hardy and reliable. You chuckle, but part of you believes him. In a larger town, you're invited to the annual Tuber Festival. It's exactly as charming as it sounds. People wear potato costumes, crown a king spud, and hold a contest to sculpt the best likeness of Frederick the Great from mashed potatoes. You wander between booths offering potato beer, potato jewelry, and even tiny potato dioramas. You ask one of the older organizers how long the tradition has been going. Since Napoleon, she says. Started as a joke, turned into pride. That's something you hadn't quite expected, how fully the potato had become part of cultural identity. It wasn't just a food or a policy. It was a legacy. And like all legacies, it had its complications. You attend a town meeting where older farmers grumble about soil depletion, over-reliance, and pests. We've built too much on one crop, says one man. One good blight and we're as doomed as the Irish. A woman counters, but we rotate. We plan. We're not foolish. The tension is real, yet measured, like two friends arguing over a shared tool. Respect is in the air, as much for the soil as for each other. You realize this crop didn't just save a kingdom from collapse. It taught it how to be resilient. How to prepare, to adapt, to plan. The potato was a tutor in more ways than one. And then, quiet again. You find yourself seated at a hilltop in the late afternoon, watching the fields below. Golden light slants over long rows of green. Children play tag along the irrigation ditches. A woman waves a ladle from a doorway, calling her family in for dinner. You think about how rare it is for something so humble to wield so much power. Not through violence. Not through gold. But through growth, through sustenance, through quiet, unwavering reliability. The potato didn't just fill bellies. It grounded a people, steadied an economy, and softened the hardest winters of history. You pluck a small blossom from a nearby plant and tuck it behind your ear. The petals are violet, the stem rough between your fingers. Somewhere down below, someone's singing. It's off-key and beautiful. You close your eyes, smile, and let the history of potatoes swirl around you like the slow wind of dusk. You stretch your legs along the hilltop a little longer, watching the day roll into evening, but your journey continues. As the last rays of sunlight slant across the potato fields, you make your way into a modest town nestled between forested hills. There's a murmur in the air, some kind of gathering taking place. You follow the warm flicker of lanterns and the smell of roast garlic and earthy tubers until you reach a low, timber-framed hall. Inside, it's buzzing. Merchants, scholars, and farmers sit elbow to elbow around heavy tables, all centered on one theme, the economics of potato storage and trade. That's right. Tonight, you're crashing an 18th-century Prussian potato symposium. The man speaking at the front wears wire-rimmed spectacles and gestures excitedly at a chalkboard scrawled with curves and crop cycles. The future, he says, is not just in the growing, but in the storing, the moving, the managing. Turns out, as potato production soared, another quiet revolution stirred beneath the surface: logistics. You're swept into debates about cellar construction, temperature control, and rodent proofing. One man swears by straw insulation, another insists clay-lined pits are the key. A third talks about insurance for spoilage, a concept that raises more than a few eyebrows. Historians still argue, a young woman leans in to whisper, whether Prussia invented the first form of crop futures here. She gives a sly smile and sips her cider. But don't quote me. The potato may have begun as a survival food, but it quickly became a tradable commodity, and with that came new systems. Cooperative storage barns began to appear across Prussia, and with them, a proto-marketplace emerged where supply could be better managed year-round. Some villages even began issuing scrip, little tokens that could be exchanged for measured quantities of potatoes held in communal storehouses. You examine one such token, it's stamped with the image of a plump, slightly smug-looking spud wearing a crown. You'd laugh, but in a world where bread riots once toppled cities, this little charm is a symbol of stability. And with trade came taxes, of course. You shuffle closer to a booth where a bureaucrat patiently explains the tuber tithe system, a levy on potato output that went partially to the state, partially to village reserves, and partially to local relief. The beauty of this? It wasn't just about state greed. The decentralized redistribution helped mitigate starvation across poor regions, essentially creating one of Europe's earliest food safety nets. Now, you lean back, cradling a warm potato pastry in your hands, and listen to the hum of ideas colliding in that little timber hall. There's talk of potato price indexing, of using dried potato pulp as livestock feed, even whispers of turning potato starch into paper. You pause. Paper? A mustachioed man nods solemnly. It's true. Not great paper, but paper. He taps the side of his nose. Useful in wartime. And here's the fringe fact of the evening: in some Prussian districts, people really did experiment with potato-based writing paper, especially during supply shortages. A few ledgers, preserved in obscure museum drawers today, carry faint ink inscriptions across pale, pulpy pages born of mashed root. It's not exactly the Gutenberg Bible, but it's history just the same. Later, as the symposium fades into rounds of drink and off-key folk songs, you find yourself walking with a group of grain traders who are rather bitter about the potato's popularity. "Took half our customers," one complains, gesturing with a half-empty mug. "Used to be oats and rye. Now it's all tubers, tubers, tubers." You nod sympathetically, but privately admire the potato's hustle. It didn't just sneak into diets, it disrupted an entire food economy. You crashed that night in the attic of a quiet inn, ceiling low, air thick with wood smoke and roasted root. A cat purrs at your feet. As you drift off, your thoughts circle back to logistics, how something as simple as keeping potatoes cool and dry created ripple effects that changed everything. The next morning, you join a merchant caravan headed west, wagons piled high with burlap sacks, wheels creaking through morning mist. As you ride, you listen to the drivers grumble about tariffs at regional checkpoints, about spoilage rates, and, fascinatingly, about counterfeits. Apparently, some unscrupulous dealers had taken to padding sacks with rocks or spoiled goods at the bottom to cheat buyers. It's oddly comforting to know food fraud isn't a modern invention. You arrive in a riverside town where a clerk at the weigh station offers to show you a confiscated sack. He dumps it dramatically, half moldy potatoes, half wet rags. Criminal, he sighs. But creative. You help resort the mess, learning how different varieties are packed, labeled, and inspected. Always check for the sprout scars, the clerk says. The honest ones are proud of them. You shuffle closer to a booth where a bureaucrat patiently explains the tuber tithe system, a levy on potato output that went partially to the state, partially to village reserves, and partially to local relief. The beauty of this? It wasn't just about state greed. The decentralized redistribution helped mitigate starvation across poor regions, essentially creating one of Europe's earliest food safety nets. Now, you lean back, cradling a warm potato pastry in your hands, and listen to the hum of ideas colliding in that little timber hall. There's talk of potato price indexing, of using dried potato pulp as livestock feed, even whispers of turning potato starch into paper. You pause. Paper? A mustachioed man nods solemnly. It's true. Not great paper, but paper. He taps the side of his nose. Useful in wartime. And here's the fringe fact of the evening. In some Prussian districts, people really did experiment with potato-based writing paper, especially during supply shortages. A few ledgers, preserved in obscure museum drawers today, carry faint ink inscriptions across pale, pulpy pages born of mashed root. It's not exactly the Gutenberg Bible, but it's history just the same. Later, as the symposium fades into rounds of drink and off-key folk songs, you find yourself walking with a group of grain traders who are rather bitter about the potato's popularity. Took half our customers, one complains, gesturing with a half-empty mug. Used to be oats and rye. Now it's all tubers, tubers, tubers. You nod sympathetically, but privately admire the potato's hustle. It didn't just sneak into diets, it disrupted an entire food economy. You crashed that night in the attic of a quiet inn, ceiling low, air thick with wood smoke and roasted root. A cat purrs at your feet. As you drift off, your thoughts circle back to logistics, how something as simple as keeping potatoes cool and dry created ripple effects that changed everything. The next morning, you join a merchant caravan headed west, wagons piled high with burlap sacks, wheels creaking through morning mist. As you ride, you listen to the drivers grumble about tariffs at regional checkpoints, about spoilage rates, and, fascinatingly, about counterfeits. Apparently, some unscrupulous dealers had taken to padding sacks with rocks or spoiled goods at the bottom to cheat buyers. It's oddly comforting to know food fraud isn't a modern invention. You arrive in a riverside town where a clerk at the weigh station offers to show you a confiscated sack. He dumps it dramatically, half moldy potatoes, half wet rags. Criminal, he sighs. But creative. You help resort the mess, learning how different varieties are packed, labeled, and inspected. Always check for the sprout scars, the clerk says. The honest ones are proud of them. You wake to the rhythmic splash of oars cutting across the water. Morning fog clings to the river like a blanket not ready to let go. You're aboard one of the potato barges now, invited by a sunburned skipper with a crooked grin and a soft spot for tuber trivia. He steers with one hand and peels a boiled potato with the other. Breakfast, he says, tossing you one with a wink. No forks needed. As you sit on a crate and nibble at the simple, earthy meal, the boat glides past sleepy villages where smoke curls lazily from chimneys and children wave from the banks. The skipper points out each port of call, each a knot in the vast web of potato trade that stretches across Prussia now like nerves through a body. This river is its spinal cord. He explains how this waterway became crucial for transporting bulk harvests from inland farms to larger markets near Berlin and beyond. Before the potatoes rise, the river had been mostly for timber and grain. But now, dedicated barges carry nothing but spuds, sorted by type, weight, and destination. The logistics are so precise, it feels like you're riding through the veins of a living, breathing system. Somewhere near a riverside depot, the boat halts for a routine inspection. Uniformed tax officers step aboard. One of them carries a slim ledger and a brass scale, while another wears an unsettlingly cheerful expression that makes you wonder how many bribes he's refused today. You watch as crates are opened, weighed, and sometimes sniffed. It's a quiet ballet of compliance and suspicion. When the officers finally wave you through, the skipper mutters something about papier and potatoes under his breath and rolls his eyes. You laugh. Bureaucracy hasn't changed much in 300 years. That afternoon, the barge docks in a larger city where the potato economy has spawned something newer still, innovation hubs. You wander through a bustling square lined with shops and stalls dedicated entirely to potato-adjacent products. There's a booth selling potato ink. Another peddling starch-based glue. One daring entrepreneur displays a prototype of a potato gas lamp. Don't ask how, he's not sharing trade secrets. And then you stumble into what feels like an accidental museum, a warehouse of odd inventions and commercial flops built in the wake of Prussia's potato boom. The curator, a scholarly man in a velvet vest, leads you through the collection with reverent boredom. Here's a potato violin, oddly tuned, mildly shriveled. There's a pair of experimental potato fiber boots that smell, well, exactly like you'd expect. You pass rows of ledgers recording speculative investments in tuber futures and bizarre marketing campaigns, eat potatoes, marry sooner. But among the oddities, there's also real brilliance. One display features early forms of crop rotation strategies refined thanks to potato resilience. Another maps the first insurance models against potato blight, with notations suggesting it inspired early iterations of public agricultural insurance. Historians still argue, the curator mumbles, whether these models later influenced the social insurance programs of the late 19th century. Your fingers trail across a faded policy document, penned in spidery script, that offers a payout for rot, frost, and the malicious acts of cows. You chuckle. Practical and oddly poetic. Later, you find yourself seated at a cafe where patrons discuss potato yields as casually as others might talk about weather. A retired civil servant nearby tells you about the rise of regional cooperatives, village alliances formed to negotiate prices, secure seed supplies, and lobby for transport subsidies. Oh, it was politics, make no mistake, he says. But polite politics. With pie charts. And here's a mainstream fact that slips easily into the moment. By the mid-19th century, Prussia had one of the most organized agrarian economies in Europe, thanks in large part to its management of staple crops like the potato. But your favorite tidbit comes from a baker leaning out of his shop window. There was once a contest for the most beautiful potato, he tells you, flour dusting his eyebrows. People came from miles. One entry was carved into the likeness of Frederick the Great himself. 1/3 place. Now that's cultural dedication. As the sun sets, you're drawn to a small public theater where a satirical puppet show is underway, tiny carved figures reenacting the Great Potato Rebellion, a fictional uprising of spuds against overtaxation. The children laugh. The adults snort quietly. And somewhere behind the laughter, you sense a real affection for the crop that had come to define not just meals, but moods, memories, and markets. When the curtains close, you walk slowly back to the river, the city hushed and golden. You pause on a bridge as traders and late ferrymen pass beneath. You realize that the humble potato hasn't just been an economic success, it's become an identity. A quiet hero. The root that grew a nation's backbone. You lean on the railing, cool metal beneath your palms, and exhale into the darkening air. Somewhere in the city, someone is boiling potatoes for supper. Somewhere else, someone is writing a letter on potato starch paper. And somewhere further still, a child clutches a carved spud doll and dreams of tuber royalty. And you? You smile, the river lapping below, and think, who knew a vegetable could carry so much weight? You stir as the night deepens and the wind off the river carries the scent of wood smoke and baked starch. Yes, again, potatoes. This time they're roasted, sliced, and spiced, sizzling on street vendor carts. It's the scent of a nation that has not only embraced the potato, but ritualized it. You're now walking through the outskirts of another town, a quieter, more provincial place where time feels a bit slower. Here, the potato isn't just food. It's tradition, festivity, and strangely, a symbol of civic pride. A nearby church is hosting something called a Kartoffelfest. Bunting flaps in the breeze. Children with cheeks painted like little spuds race in burlap sacks. Elderly women in aprons fry potato pancakes and argue loudly in Low German over whether Frederick the Great would have preferred applesauce or sour cream. One of them spots you eavesdropping and hands you a pancake with a grin. Sauerrahm, she insists. You do not argue. Later, a local historian, half performer, half priest, steps onto a makeshift stage to give a dramatic retelling of The Night of the 99 Potatoes, a tongue-in-cheek legend where villagers supposedly foiled a grain thief by planting potatoes in his cart and following the sprouts the next spring. Historians still argue, he says with a theatrical wink, whether it happened or whether it was just really clever fertilizer. You chuckle and settle on a hay bale, belly full, eyelids beginning to droop. And yet, just as you're ready to drift into a carb-induced nap, you hear the steady clang of blacksmith tools nearby. You're drawn to a small forge where innovations, quite literally, are heating up. The blacksmith, a woman with soot-streaked arms and a soft voice, shows you her latest work, adjustable iron clamps for transporting crates more securely. Too many potatoes lost to bumpy roads, she mutters. This will change things. She lets you try the mechanism, simple, sturdy, undeniably clever. You wonder how many of these inventions were born not out of ambition, but out of the potato's sheer ubiquity. When a crop is everywhere, problems become opportunities. Spillage? Build better crates. Theft? Better locks. Spoilage? Starch preservation techniques. There's even early refrigeration experimentation involving buried cellars insulated with straw and clay, primitive, but effective. One local inventor even tried sealing sliced potatoes between sheets of glass to study dehydration. Accidentally made the first potato chip. Didn't catch on until much later, he grumbles. But it was crunchy, I'll tell you that. The community spirit here is palpable, mutual aid societies, cooperative barns, communal storage systems. You learn that entire neighborhoods pooled funds for what they called potato insurance, long before the state formalized such things. If your crop failed, your neighbors helped. Not out of charity, but solidarity. If you didn't have potatoes, one man says while mending a fence, you didn't have a winter. By this point, the economic lesson is clear: resilience isn't just policy, it's people. A society can thrive on a humble root if it builds networks as sturdy as its soil. But of course, even utopias have their skeptics. You meet a lanky poet sitting beneath a tree, scribbling verses about the tyranny of tubers. He offers you a draft. We eat them, dream them, vote with them, he sighs. What if the potatoes are eating us? You laugh, a soft wheeze in the moonlight. Even satire has a place in economic development. Before long, the town square transforms into an open-air dance. Fiddlers play under lanterns made from hollowed gourds and wax. You're drawn into a slow circle of dancers, no skill required, just shuffling steps and warm hands. A young girl dances with a bundle of small potatoes tied in ribbons. You ask why. She beams. They're lucky. You nod. Of course they are. As the music floats on and the stars scatter across the black velvet sky, you find yourself once again amazed. Not by kings or wars or revolutions, but by the tiny, stubborn ways people adapt and make beauty from necessity. Mainstream historical fact: Prussia's potato policies eventually inspired similar food security models across Europe, particularly in regions vulnerable to crop failures. The idea that a humble, reliable crop could be leveraged as a national stabilizer? Radical at the time. Common sense now. Quirky side note: one small Prussian town briefly experimented with potato-based paper money during a localized coin shortage. The notes were starchy, fragile, and strangely aromatic. Smelled like dinner, according to one account. As the celebration winds down, you find yourself wrapped in a borrowed wool cloak, feet bare in the cool grass. The town's laughter fades to murmurs. The night has done what it always does: it's softened the sharp edges of reality and wrapped the day in a warm, slow hush. You sit on the porch of a quiet inn, the distant hoot of an owl breaking the silence. In your hands? A potato, carved with your initials. A gift from a child. For luck, she said. You turn it over once, then set it beside you. The moonlight glints off its bumpy skin like worn brass. You wake, or maybe you never fully slept, on that porch with the carved potato still beside you, a little smoother from your absent thumb tracing the grooves. The town is hushed, tucked into slumber, and all that's left awake is you, the stars, and the idea that potatoes once saved a kingdom from collapse. But now the air shifts. You rise, drawn away from the countryside into the seat of power itself. Picture marble halls, polished boots clicking on stone, candlelight casting soft shadows over policy scrolls. You're in Berlin, inside a dimly lit government office in the early 19th century, where the potato story takes another unexpected turn, not in farms or markets, but in parliament chambers and economic treatises. You sit among ministers, economists, and advisors with powdered wigs and ink-stained fingers, arguing over fiscal reform. The debate is earnest, and as usual, terribly slow. But one topic consistently bubbles to the surface: agricultural reform, and yes, potatoes again. Because now, it's not just about survival, it's about economic identity. You see, Prussia had slowly restructured its entire peasant economy around the rhythms of potato cultivation. Taxes were being calculated based on expected tuber yields. Crop insurance models were refined, grain tariffs adjusted, and wartime provisioning plans reorganized so that the potato, which grows underground and is harder to confiscate during raids, could act as a civilian food reserve. A food of the people, tucked safely beneath the soil. Mainstream historical fact: by the 1830s, Prussia had become a leader in agricultural policy, influencing economic reforms throughout the German states. The potato played a central role, not merely as a crop, but as a strategic asset: hardy, efficient, calorie-dense. Your boots echo as you wander past ledgers listing harvest figures, soldier rations, population growth charts. A soft-voiced official explains to you that when Napoleon's wars disrupted grain imports, it was the stored potato that allowed Prussia to feed its troops and avoid famine. The tuber kept the kingdom from crumbling, he murmurs, barely looking up from his notes. Historians still argue whether Prussia's later economic ascendancy, culminating in the Zollverein, a German customs union, was made possible by these modest reforms tied to agricultural reliability. Was the potato merely a symptom of modern thinking, or did it fuel that thinking? You pace through the debate like a silent participant, invisible yet oddly involved. In one corner of the grand hall, you find a display, elegantly framed drawings of potato storage innovations. Cool cellars lined with ash, stacked like treasure. Airflow vents shaped like upside-down ships' hulls. Even early iterations of root pressure humidifiers to extend shelf life. Someone whispers beside you, economics is just problem solving. With dirt under your nails. A ledger flips open to reveal an odd entry. An economist once tried to calculate the national value of a single potato over the course of 20 years. His answer? Unknowable, but comforting. Meanwhile, beyond the papers and policies, a cultural shift is seeding itself. You hear a poet read at a salon about the potato of state, a quiet rebellion against elitism. A schoolteacher declares that a child who plants a potato understands sovereignty. It's odd. But not wrong. Quirky side note, one Prussian bureaucrat in 1842 proposed an official state holiday called Kartoffelmontag, where civil servants would rest and reflect on humility in nourishment. It never caught on, but not because people didn't try. Later, you sit in a plush chair inside a candlelit reading room, sipping weak tea while nobles and reformists argue politely. A pamphlet lies on the table, Potatoes and Prosperity, a Citizen's Guide. The author, an idealistic economist, posits that a government's strength lies not in gold reserves but in caloric security. Bread for riots, he writes, but potatoes for resilience. The quote echoes as you drift down a hallway lined with oil portraits. Frederick is there, again, looking slightly smug, as if he knew this would all happen. You pause. What began as royal propaganda had, somehow, rooted itself into civic policy, scientific development, and cultural myth. And yet, not everyone is pleased. At a nearby university, radical students mock spud economics, staging fake debates where they accuse one another of tuber tyranny. You sneak into a lecture where a professor quietly pushes back against potato monoculture, warning of soil depletion and dependency. Diversity, she whispers, is the real wealth. Her voice fades as you move back outside, the cool air welcoming you. Across the courtyard, two young lovers dig a shallow pit in the university gardens, planting 3 potatoes and a coin. Just in case, the boy says with a grin. You nod, because of course. By now, your shoes are dusty from court and campus alike. The stars above you feel sharper, closer somehow. You wonder if this journey, this slow and sleepy walk through economic evolution, was ever really about potatoes at all. Maybe it was about balance. Food and finance. Tradition and innovation. The absurd and the essential. And how, sometimes, salvation comes in the form of something small, round, and lightly speckled. You keep walking, boots quiet against the cobblestones, as Prussia drifts behind you like a well-read chapter. Ahead, the path softens, fields again, yes, but this time they're stitched with railways and punctuated by smoking chimneys. The 19th century has given way to the 20th, and the humble potato, once a weapon against starvation, is now a quiet foundation beneath something far grander, industrialization. You arrive in Silesia, then Brandenburg, where trains loaded with sacks of potatoes chug along new iron arteries. These aren't just food anymore, they're fuel. Not literally burned in engines, but powering a broader economy, feeding the workers who power the mines, the children who attend expanding public schools, the soldiers stationed at new garrisons. A local mayor gives you a tour of a potato processing facility. Not a factory in the smoggy Dickensian sense, but a sort of steam-kissed workshop where potatoes are turned into flour, alcohol, even starch for early photography and textile manufacturing. Not bad for a vegetable once used as pig feed, he chuckles. Mainstream historical fact, by the late 1800s, Prussia, and later the German Empire, had integrated the potato into its industrial food chain. It became an essential component of both rural economies and urban provisioning systems. It fed the military, the workforce, and the poor. And yet, as you listen to the whistle of a steam engine and feel the hum of modernity beneath your feet, you notice something else. A murmur. A resistance. Not everyone is on board. A group of small farmers sits under a tree, sharing schnapps and complaints. They're skeptical of large-scale agribusiness. They miss the days of bartering potatoes at local markets, of planting with their hands instead of following crop rotation schedules dictated by state officials. One grizzled farmer tosses you a small, knobby spud. "This one's from my grandfather's plot," he says. "Saved him during the grain tax riots. Now they want me to grow hybrids for the starch mill." You keep it in your pocket. Historians still argue whether the centralization of agriculture in the German Empire was a necessary evolution or a soft erasure of peasant autonomy. Was the potato a bridge to prosperity, or a leash? It's a debate still simmering in lecture halls and long-form op-eds. And maybe in dreams, too. Now you find yourself in a quiet corner of a war room, maps, coffee cups, the faint ticking of a wall clock. Officers discuss supply lines, and once again, the potato is at the center of it all. In times of war, it's the fallback crop. Reliable. Resistant. Cheap. From the Franco-Prussian War to the lead-up to World War I, the potato doesn't just survive, it adapts. One official whispers that during training exercises, soldiers are told, if you can't get bread, dig for spuds. You picture a muddy trench, a soldier cradling a warm potato pulled from a cooking tin. Not glamorous, but deeply human. And then comes the 20th century twist you didn't quite expect. In a corner tavern, just outside Leipzig, you meet an inventor showing off a potato-powered battery, just 2 pennies and a zinc nail, glowing faintly on a damp wooden table. Children gather around, giggling as the tiny bulb flickers. Quirky side note, in 1913, a fringe German science journal published a piece exploring the electrical soul of tubers. It was mostly nonsense, but charming, hopeful nonsense. As the century darkens, so too does the role of the potato. World wars, economic collapse, and rationing twist its legacy. You move through kitchens lined with ration books, where families boil the same handful of spuds 3 different ways. You see famine lines and hear the hollow clatter of cooking pots. And still, there's the potato, hanging on. Fried, mashed, stewed. Lifeline and legacy. A grandmother gives you a recipe, salt potatoes with mustard butter. Feed your belly, not your fears, she says softly. You write it down on a napkin and tuck it next to the farmer's spud in your coat pocket. And then, just as the clouds begin to gather again, you're tugged gently upward. It's the Cold War now. Berlin is split. Markets are monitored. Food is political currency. And once again, officials whisper about the utility of potatoes, not just in feeding people, but in feeding ideology. West Germany distributes surplus to allies. East Germany controls potato quotas to maintain economic order. Even your dreams are being rationed. In the quiet of a cramped socialist flat, you listen to a boy tell bedtime stories where potatoes are heroes, rescuing villages from floods, hiding secret messages, outwitting wolves. One grew so big it rolled down a mountain and scared off a tank, he says proudly. You believe him. And in that moment, you realize the potato had outlived kings, wars, revolutions, and economic theories. It was still here, still quiet, still dependable. Like you. You step outside into a soft East German dusk, where children play with wooden toy trucks and old men peel potatoes on the stoop. A woman hums a lullaby that drifts like steam from a pot. And somewhere, off in the distance, a train rumbles forward, carrying another load of quiet resilience. The train disappears beyond the tree line, and now you're alone again. But it's a peaceful alone. The kind that invites reflection, not fear. You keep walking, one foot in front of the other, and the cobbled roads of Prussia fade beneath you like the pages of a well-loved book. It's the modern day now, though time feels like a suggestion more than a rule in this dream. You pass into a classroom, whiteboards humming, fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. A teacher stands before a chalk-smeared board and speaks of agricultural revolutions. Her pointer taps a photo, a single, knobbly, brown potato. And this, she says, saved an entire kingdom. Mainstream historical fact: in modern Germany, the legacy of the Prussian potato program is still taught in schools, not just as agricultural trivia, but as a symbol of resilience and strategy. Monuments, like the famous Potato King statue of Frederick the Great in Berlin, continue to draw curious visitors and sleepy schoolchildren alike. You slide into a desk at the back of the class, scribbling notes in a notebook you don't remember bringing. The paper smells faintly of earth. Your pencil wanders as the lecture continues. Pie charts. Food security indexes. A timeline of world potato production. And then something more intimate, stories of modern farmers using satellite mapping to optimize potato yield, apps that let you scan your potato for ripeness, biotech firms attempting to design the perfect spud. It's the Enlightenment all over again, but now the royal decrees come from lab coats and data centers. And yet, as the world grows faster, louder, flashier, the potato remains deeply uncool. Unpretentious. Earnest. It's not kale. It's not quinoa. It's not spirulina. It's just food. Nourishing, starchy, grounding food. A quirky tidbit: in 2014, a group of German artists held a potato museum exhibit in Leipzig, where each potato was displayed with a fake biography. One was a philosopher, another a world traveler, one a failed opera singer. None of them spoiled. You find that you're smiling. The teacher wraps up the lesson, and you drift into a different room, sleek, clean, humming with technology. A food lab. There's a chef in a lab coat, plating tiny dollops of deconstructed Prussian potato soup on bone-white ceramic. Liquid nitrogen swirls around the edges. A tribute, he says, to one of the greatest survival foods in history. You don't tell him about the one in your pocket. Historians still argue whether the Prussian embrace of the potato was the single most important agricultural reform of the 18th century, or simply one of many clever moves in Frederick's larger plan to centralize, feed, and militarize his state. Was it vision, or convenience? A moment of compassion, or just good PR? You let them argue. You're not here to debate. You're here to remember. Now you're walking through a farmer's market in present-day Berlin. Stalls brim with heirloom spuds, blue, purple, golden, fingerling. A woman lets you sample a slice, still warm from a wood-fired oven. This one's from Silesia, she says. Been in our family since 1790. The flavor is rich and nutty, a little earthy, a lot comforting. You nod. Tastes like an empire. She grins. Or the end of one. The wind picks up, brushing your coat, your hair, the edges of this long, winding journey. The past is close now. So close you could boil it, mash it, and serve it with gravy. You find yourself back in that same Prussian field where we began. Only now, the land is gentle, greener. The guards are gone. The peasants, too. In their place, silence, birdsong, and the soft, unmistakable rustle of potato leaves in bloom. You kneel, reaching into your coat. The old potato, from that farmer's plot in Brandenburg, is still there. Not molded. Not dried out. Just, resting. You dig a small hole, press it into the earth, and cover it gently with both hands. No grand ceremony. No speech. Just one act of quiet continuity. It's funny, you think, how a kingdom tried to force its people to eat this vegetable with posters, guards, and royal decrees, and now, centuries later, it's just comfort food. Fries. Chips. Soup. Vodka. Gratins and gnocchi. It's the food you eat when you're sad. When you're broke. When you're full of dreams but empty on groceries. And somehow, despite everything, it's still royal. You lie back in the field, eyes on the clouds drifting across a Prussian blue sky. It smells faintly of dirt, starch, and something else, something like memory. You're still lying there, in the soft hush of the field, where the air hums with the quiet pride of centuries past. The leaves rustle like whispers, and even the birds seem to know it's time to settle in for the night. Let your eyes grow heavier now. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the wind's gentle sway. The sky above you, once torn by empires and inventions, is just sky now. Wide, peaceful, waiting. And that potato you planted? You don't have to watch it grow. It already has. In kitchens, in classrooms, in quiet conversations over dinner tables across the world. It grew each time someone chose nourishment over noise. Simplicity over spectacle. You were never just walking through history, you were part of it. A traveler, a guest, maybe even a witness to the odd, unlikely legacy of a vegetable that reshaped a kingdom and quietly resisted time itself. So, exhale. Let the stories settle into your bones. Let the worries of your own day, your deadlines, your notifications, your endless to-dos, fade into the warm soil of this moment. You've wandered far, and now it's okay to rest. Tomorrow, there will be more history. More strange facts, forgotten names, and curious turns of fate. But tonight, there's just quiet. Just the potato. Just you. Good night.